We'll do it the same way. If all of you could take, 3 to 5 minutes, talk about yourself, and talk about your experiences, either working on or working on a launch for a drug internationally. And I say it in that way only because I realize that there's virtually no launch of a drug in India, if you will, particularly for a rare disease. So, and I also realize that late phase development sort of overlaps with launch. So feel free to use the breadth of your perspectives to answer the question. So, Meredith, if you want to start. Wait, hang on. Let me find your profile first.
Okay. Hopefully I turned it.
There it is.
Is this on? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to attend. It's really great to, I had said earlier that it's really nice to be able to get out of the office and speak with all of you. It's really re-energizing because this is what we do in bringing medicines to communities around the world. My name is Meredith Manning. I have been in industry probably for almost 30 years now. And I currently work for a company called Pharma Essentia. We're a Taiwanese headquartered company, and we are focusing on rare blood cancers. So our company is really interesting that we straddle between rare disease and oncology, which kind of makes it double difficult, if you will. I started, as I mentioned, I've been in industry for almost 30 years. I really started in earnest in my career at Pfizer, which back in 2000 was probably the furthest from rare disease. We were really focusing on primary care, but I had an opportunity to move into oncology. And then I really moved into rare disease when I started working at Baxter in the hemophilia A and B market. And I worked with over 65 different countries across the globe and had the pleasure and the honor of working very closely with my Indian colleagues. So I'm going to share a couple stories as to how Baxter actually did commercialize both plasma as well as recombinant factor VIII in India and had some really innovative ways. I think we've said on the last panel mentioned that it's really something that motivates all of us to be able to bring medicines and touch the lives of patients. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Anish. First of all, I want to, before I talk about myself, which will be short, I can assure you of that. The last panel, I think there's good cross-reference to our discussion here. And I thought they did a tremendous job, as did you, Anish. So I'm Matt Pauls. I'm chair of the board of directors and CEO of Savara. Savara is a publicly traded biotech company focused, laser focused on rare pulmonary respiratory diseases. I have been in the industry for over 25 years. I'm a recovered lawyer, and thank goodness. And again, I'm thrilled to be here. I've launched rare disease drugs in the United States. Also, have launched spec pharma drugs outside the United States. I'm thrilled to be here today. So thank you for having me, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Matt. My name is Mike Blum. I most recently was at Homology Medicines for the last 5 years as a chief commercial officer, focused on gene therapy, gene editing programs for rare diseases. Prior to that, I've probably been in the industry about 30 years, but the last 15 years or so focused on rare disease launches. Probably been part of teams or led teams that have brought anywhere from 8 to 10 rare disease programs to market, and probably plan to bring another 5 to come to market that never kind of crossed the line from a regulatory standpoint. But I've worked in disease categories like MPS II, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, Prader-Willi syndrome, and have a pretty good perspective on, I think that what I was excited about coming here and participating was, I know from a commercial perspective, and to get a product approved, there's an intense amount of collaboration within rare disease, whether it's advocacy groups, government agencies, regulatory agencies, the parts of governments that are responsible for payment, physicians. So you become a stakeholder in that area when you're part of a manufacturer's team. And it's that perspective, I think, that has proven to be successful, because rare disease companies don't think about bringing their product only to the United States. It really is a global venture in most companies, even the smallest of companies, to maximize the product's presence with the patients that need it. So hopefully we'll get into a little of that today. And thank you for having me.
Neil?
Great. Can you hear me? I'll be brief. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I've learned a lot both last evening and today. I'll start by just with a quick disclaimer. I am not a commercial expert. Have launched 2 small products as part of being the CEO and co-founder of a company called BridgeBio, which also focuses in the area of genetically driven cancer as well as Mendelian disease. Those 2 products are not available, unfortunately, in India. We are about to launch our 3rd large product in ATTR cardiomyopathy, with the hope that that product will one day be available in India. I come to this space as a PhD discovery scientist. The first company I co-founded is called Myocardia, which works in the area of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and raised that because that medicine is also approved now under the guidance of BMS, also not available broadly in India. And finally, I'll just mention that I have a cousin with neurofibromatosis type 1 who lives in India. There is a wonderful drug, a low-dose MEK inhibitor for that condition, and he has no access to it in India. So my hope today is really to learn from our panelists as to how we can do better, both in terms of the clinical research, which was discussed earlier, but also in terms of commercial launch and broad access within India.
Thanks, Neil. So I'm going to follow on what Mike just said about, this is really a team approach. If it's a rare disease, you're starting with, whether the CEO of the company or the chief commercialization officer or the CMO, everyone is sort of involved in this process of figuring out the launch of the drug. So if you take that and you say that you were part of the team in some way, have you had any experiences that are relevant to commercializing drugs outside the Western world? So Meredith, do you want to start?
Sure, happy to. So I feel very fortunate at Pharmacentia. We actually are really well commercialized in Asia. So being a Taiwanese-based company, we're in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, China, and Singapore. And I think the biggest thing of being part of a team, and you're going to hear this probably a lot from the panel, is about market access. And setting up health economics and outcomes research. And so that's probably one of the biggest focuses that we have, is the cross pollination of best practices around burden of illness, cost of not treating the illness or the disease. So that's one part that we work very closely on, and we're looking at probably trying to commercialize in Brazil next with a partner, and that is one of the top things, is not outside of regulatory, is focusing on HEOR and outcomes. So that would be my immediate answer with a team approach, is definitely the first and foremost is focusing on market access. And I know we're going to get into advocacy, but that is just one of the most important aspects, is focusing on advocacy. And I'll dive in deeper on another question on that one.
Yeah, so the internal team that was referenced by Anish and Meredith is obviously mission critical when planning to launch, commercialize, and really anywhere. But I'm going to steal a little bit of the thunder on advocacy, just because I think I cannot emphasize enough. And again, I hearken back to the previous panel and this notion of having external stakeholders whom have real incentive to help drive forward both the clinical development and subsequent, hopefully, commercialization of a rare disease therapeutic or cure is it's very difficult to quantify. There's this notion in rare disease drug development and commercialization of in a very basic way, momentum. You must have this insatiable need and desire that translates into positive momentum to make it happen. We very often get into the discussions around the math equation in each market, right? And sure, there's a math equation piece to any, for-profit company that you have to at least address and acknowledge. But this notion of passion and momentum and the unwillingness to not drive forward something like a rare disease therapeutic or cure is just everything. So therefore, I can't emphasize enough the critical nature of advocates, just given the fact that they are momentum creators very often.
Thanks. I would just maybe lean on my most recent experience where we had a gene therapy program that was in the clinic that was showing to be very difficult to recruit for. And we started to look for organizations to work with. And when I think of kind of the team piece, I think of the conversation that we had with a company that was stepping forward that wanted that thought they could help us in China because there was a newly identified group of patients that really fit the profile for the trial. And when I think about kind of what went into our decision making about what would be a good partner for a part of the world that as a small company we're probably not going to immediately engage with, and it really came down to somebody that understood where we were coming from, but we understood where they were going, why they wanted the product, why they were willing to step up early in clinical to be part of the commercialization, laid out the advocacy connections that they had, and helped us think through, to Matt's point, I think orphan drug companies are relentless by nature, but helped us kind of think about what a real goal was. What is success really going to look like? It's probably not going to be enrolling X amount of patients. It's probably Y. And are we good with that? And then as we thought about commercialization, it wasn't saying what broadly, what is the value of a market like China? They helped us understand that you're probably thinking about provinces and percentages of patients within a couple of those early on, because here's the most recent history that they had that we had no access to. So there's a huge amount, I think, of when you're going into a market that as a company that without a lot of experience, it's developing credibility and trust right away, and then really getting aligned behind what are the goals going forward, and getting at realistic goals. And that, I think, with that collaboration really proved to be successful to move the ball forward, thinking about teamwork.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have much to add. I'll just say for those two aforementioned small medicines that we did launch in China and the Middle East and in South America, one, I think, underappreciated piece of any launch is the use and easy access to genomic data and databases that have already been established. It allows the launch to move rapidly and for one to identify patients very quickly. If you can couple that with some sort of newborn or early screening or sequencing, obviously that could be very profound for the types of conditions we work on.
Yeah, I was just thinking if there's one thing that I would like for everybody to take away, actually two things, is one, you really to commercialize successfully anywhere in the US and India, anywhere, is you really have to start many years out. And so we had talked about developing relationships with advocacy organizations. The second thing is we at Pharmacentia, we say yes and. So yes, 1000% you need to work with advocacy organizations, but the and to that is that many of the patients unfortunately are not connected to the advocacy organizations. So you need to partner with the advocacy organizations to identify where the patients are. So in hemophilia, hemophilia A is a genetic disease that afflicts mostly, almost 99% males. And so we had an opportunity to go out and not just work with the advocacy organization, but we found organizations for young boys and young men and had an opportunity to do disease education there. So I would say in commercialization, you always have to be very curious and go a step further in identifying where the patients are living their life and interacting outside of the advocacy groups. And the advocacy groups can help you identify that.
Interesting. Neil, you talked about launching drugs in small markets like China, Middle East, etc. Talk about that a bit. What kind of market was it? What led you there? Where did you start, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to call some of those markets because sometimes we're offering the drug on a compassionate basis. But China is a good example, I think. There were two real things that brought us into that marketplace. One was with small molecules. We felt like it could be a reasonable ROI, and there was a very, very clear development path that had been laid out. So, people talk about the 40-month lag between US FDA approval and approval in India. I think that lag is about half that in China right now and coming down. So at least for a small company like ours, we could really very clearly see what the regulatory path could look like. So that was, I would say one piece of it. The second piece of it was we have been very interested in this, probably a topic for the prior panel, but it really is what motivates a lot of our international work is using data from other countries and then bringing it back to the US. And at least at that time, there was a pretty clear mechanism by which to do that in China because we can find patients everywhere. And so if we could have a little bit of a clearer process for that vis-a-vis India, I think that then makes it an interesting quote unquote market for us to move quickly in. And I don't think it ever will be a market. I think it is compassionate use from the standpoint of the drugs that we work on, but that could be fine too.
Mike, any specific examples that launching a drug in one place, starting in one place, going to the next one, how do you typically think of a launch sequence? Where would you go first? If it was a rare disease drug where the prevalence was, let's say, the same ethnically, where would you go first?
Well, obviously, when you're trying to assess kind of that global launch, there's a lot of different components that go in. Part of it will be, there's the regulatory piece. Where do we think, given the profile of the drug, do we think we'll be successful? And what does that look like kind of on a global basis? I think market access is a big piece to that thinking. Where can reimbursement occur? So when physicians and patients say this drug is a really good idea, the drug will be available and paid for. And then I think there's an element of population thinking about where the greatest need is. I think there's from a not greatest number of patients. I think there's an element of factoring in patients organized, advocacy groups, and are they connectable? And then I think as you start to kind of put that in, you start to kind of force rank the opportunity and think about the viability of individual countries and really try to assign that almost like a numerical value to prioritize kind of where we think this can happen quick and where we think that it will require some time. I think time is another component that gets weighed into that to think about, as you think about a launch sequence, if you're a rare disease company, You certainly want to make sure that in a place like the U.S., where a lot of those levers are in place to pull, you'll be able to go forward. But you certainly need to think from a commercial standpoint. Success really is global. You want to maximize kind of the value of the product. You have to make sure that there's a global account for that.
Matt, Meredith, any thoughts?
I think both Neil and Mike mentioned this, and again, just to put an exclamation point on it, this notion of the at a high level patient registry, the knowables, where are the patients? That drives a lot, of course. Again, I'm now going back to the previous panel again, but around clinical trial selection, regulatory alignment, and then of course commercialization. It's so critical when you're looking forward to be able to have a good sketch on where the patients are, not just in the country, but at a site level, preferably if at all possible. So it all fits together, I think, nicely. But again, I promise I won't keep beating this drum, but the whole in orphan rare disease commercialization, it is so intrinsically tied to your the clinical development plan and how you executed that and why and where.
Meredith, thoughts? All right. So let's talk India for a second. So we know there's a lot of people there. We know from that perspective, it makes sense. Is the lack of commercialization activity in India in some part related to lack of knowledge? Or do you all think that we understand the challenges of the place well enough? I don't know if my question makes sense.
I think that there, as I, listening this morning with regard to India, I think there's the big kind of macro India related issues. And then there are the disease state therapeutic, orphan rare disease specific issues. And it feels a little bit like, it's how do you get started and where do you get started? And maybe that's the question. And there is, of course, the math equation that's front and center. We've talked about that. There is the population size, without question, there are hundreds of thousands, if not many, many more patients with rare diseases, many, many more in India. The question is, how do you get started and who gets started? And I get the sense that what you need, again, is you need momentum in a specific therapeutic category that is driven at a local level and kind of, and then driven outward, if that makes any sense.
I think commercializing in India really takes planning. Yes, I think people don't understand 29 states. How do I tackle that? I'm a small biotech company. Do I have the resources to do it? But there's also the time from a regulatory standpoint. But I don't think that people really think innovatively about it. If it takes time from a regulatory, I do a clinical trial, not just compassionate use. And then, as Matt said, you need that momentum. So you get the advocacy group, the communities involved. But what people haven't said is that there's international price referencing. So that's really the biggest, and Matt brings up the math. The biggest thing is that many countries reference your most recent 5, 7, 10 launches. And if the price point in a country is so low, then that puts it back in the launch sequencing. It's unfortunate reality. And so I think many companies say, well, I'm going to get 10 countries going or 15 countries going before I even think about India or another country. And I think that's if you have the ability to start early and build that momentum, then you can launch, without pushing it out 4 to 5 to 10 years, if that makes sense.
Go ahead, Neil.
I think it's a little bit of understanding, and my hope is that it changes pretty radically on a go forward basis, because it feels like there's, even outside this room, there's a lot of momentum around a whole class of new drugs that I think can economically be offered there. But for instance, we were talking about this earlier. Who are the 3 distributors you would work with today? Like I mean, I know that for Brazil. I know that for the regions in the Middle East. I don't know it for India, shamefully, but there has to be a blueprint, and when people establish the blueprint, then we'll know how to do it. Yeah, so I think it is a little bit of understanding. It's not an understanding, obviously within the country of how to find these patients, how to care for the patients, super high quality, obviously, clinical trial sites and more every day. So I think there's and great genomic data. So it's all there. I think we just need to know, do we work with Sun? Do we work with whom? Right? Can we give it away in a compassionate way so that it doesn't affect price or anything, but that, we can maximize access to these medicines? We just need to almost write down the blueprint.
I kind of like that. That makes it seem surmountable. Seems like it's more of a knowledge issue, work issue, which is surmountable. But what Meredith just mentioned may not be surmountable, because if there's true international price referencing, that could be a real problem, not for compassionate use, but even if you were to figure this out, and let's say Price Waterhouse, or maybe not them, but LEK did the study, and LEK said your drug is 100,000 in the US and 50,000 in Europe, and it's 20,000 in India, but the number of patients is 3 times as much in India. That math would probably still not work.
But sorry, I'll shut up after this, but that's also true in Canada today. Right. I mean, it's true in myriad countries around the world. And I think sponsors can make the determination to say, I'm going to go in at a very low price point or a no price point and use this as a space for phase 4 clinical trials, use this as a space for, further interrogation of specific adjacent indications, et cetera. So I think there are ways to do it. If you set as your core thesis that once I've developed a medicine, global access is my mindset and it's required, which I think it should be ethically, then, you're staring at the NPV equation. It's never going to be run by India anyway. You could just give it away. Not a gene therapy, because that's high COGS, but I think you can for small molecules.
So I'll take you back to the last question from the last panel. I think it was Moa who asked the question about, what if the price was, a fraction in India, but you were treating, X times as many patients? Does it make sense then? Is that what we're saying?
No, that's actually not what I'm saying, because that specific example of Glybera or whatever it is, you can't sell something at a unit cost loss and have huge amounts of volume. That's sort of the fallacy of the entirety of the economy for the last decade. So you do need to have profits associated with each sale. The volume won't make up for that, but I think we can have a real-minded conversation to say, we'll never make it profitable there. That's okay. It still can be a profitable thing for an organization to do, or at least part and parcel of the ethics of an organization to launch it broadly. So I think we have to just say that out loud.
Makes sense. Matt, any thoughts?
Profound. So
Well, this is a hard panel, and we knew that going in. Mike, go ahead.
I think the reference pricing is important, and as companies go forward, there's a kind of a price band, right? That in most situations isn't that elastic. But then it gets to a point. I think one of the things that we have to do as an industry especially in the rare disease community, think about is, Matt, you might hit me over the head for this, but every commercial person sits in a meeting that involves life cycle management, right? And so, if you have the first in market product, 6 years from now, there's a better mousetrap coming. And you need to start thinking through what's the impact to that program and to your company as a result of competition or what have you going forward. And so as you think through that conversation, there gets a point in time where the value of that product changes. And I think not enough companies think through, what do I do with it at that point? I'm not talking about 3 years after launch, but there are plenty of orphan drugs that are now 10, 15, some even 20 years post-launch. What can happen with those products, especially in spaces where there hasn't been a lot of competitive development, to broaden access in a way that makes sense for those companies that still are responsible for their rights? I think there's a part of that I know as somebody who's thought about life cycle management a lot, we don't think enough of. So I think that the pricing on the front end is one piece, but I think as we think of a lot of these products now that have been around for a long time, are those the types of products that we can leverage in a way to provide access in a methodology that we're not doing today?
So let's say, as a company, your thesis is global access. That's what you want to do. What do we need to do to make this available in India? Let's take the example of a small molecule rare disease drug, which is as prevalent there as it is here. Meredith?
I think as everybody was talking, my mind was going to what Neil said is, is this just an area, or whether it be India or another geography, that you just say, okay, we're going to provide this for free. And I think that what we have seen at Pharma Essentia in working in some of other countries is that the data and working with our R&D colleagues, that whether it's compassionate use, and I heard that we want to move away from that and do real clinical trials in some of these areas, but generating data that we can then utilize with the FDA or with the EMA to try and advance the science, to try and advance labels elsewhere is really, really beneficial, and I would say profitable to companies. And so that's another aspect. I didn't answer your question. I'm avoiding it completely. But I think that's another way of looking at how you would want to commercialize. Until at least you have international price referencing is very real. And so if you can get through your first 10 or 15 countries quickly and, build the market in India first, that's what I would think about.
Right.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the definition of global access. How do you define it? And I think Neil brought up a very good point. Access comes in, providing access to therapeutics comes in many different fashions. I mean, compassionate use, expanded access is a very important, tactic that could fit right squarely into what you deem to be your global, your global access to medication.
Mike, no comments.
I would add more to that. I mean, I think
your microphone is dying.
I think there's a why to that question that Matt was talking about, and I think there's a when. If that's your commitment, you start that early in the life of a program. And really late, it's going to be harder, and maybe that the answer is
Neil?
I think I don't know all the answers, but I think the chapters of the plan are fairly clear. There's a regulatory chapter. There's the access chapter, which if we're saying we're providing it for free, it's fairly clear. And then there's a supply and distribution chapter, which I think also with a small molecule could be fairly clear. The distributor piece, I think, is the thing that I've been talking about. Is it Sun? Is it someone else? Is it? And then there's the patient finding aspect of it, which I also think can be pretty easily doable if, in the cases of precision cardiology like we work in. So I think those are the 4 chapters. If someone could write it out, then I think we could all follow it.
It's doable. Any questions from the audience?
I just want to know, thank you, how we can put ourselves in front of the big corporations. Our disease is a hereditary cancer predisposition on the p53 gene, so we need gene therapy. I am the education and liaison coordinator for our organization. I travel around, but what I mainly do is talk about the disease, make sure that people know that there is an organization out there to help these people. I'm hearing today and yesterday that it's very important that we take the next step in putting ourselves out there so that the pharma and the gene therapy people know that we're out there. We have the p53 gene, which is one of the most studied genes in the world. And I just wanted to know if you could give us some advice on where I go with the next step, because I think I've maxed out, talking to the genetic counselors and the oncologist, and I think we need to move into the next space, and I would really appreciate any advice on where we go from here.
Go ahead. Anyone?
I can start. Do you have a therapy already within the advocacy? Okay. Okay, so a little down. I mean, so this is a well-worn blueprint actually, whereby advocates will put together a small package. If you haven't gone to the Global Genes website, which I know is a sponsor here, I'd encourage you to do that. And typically, what smaller biotechs like us are looking for is a clear understanding of the mechanism of biology, the pathomechanism of the disease, whether or not you could strike it at its source via gene therapy, as you suggest, who the seminal academic leaders are, and just some high-level description of what the unmet need may be, because we have statistical genetics teams that can look at that. That's really it. I mean, it's 4 or 5 pages that sort of brings together a lot of the knowledge that you have. And then I'd encourage, it's there's Ultragenics, BioMarin, there's probably a handful of all the companies represented up here that you get in front of with information like that to start the dialogue. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, we can catch up afterwards. It's, there's several groups that can help you do that quickly.
Harsha?
Great panel. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. Although we still don't have the answers we are looking for. So my question on behalf of a father who called me a few days ago or a few weeks ago from India, desperate, father of a child with 32-year-old son, lost his daughter already. And this is for a ultra rare disease for which there is a known drug that a small biotech is holding, maybe on the shelf, figuring out how to get it through the regulatory process. So father was literally pleading desperation. I'm willing to sell my home, whatever it takes. Please help me save my son. There is this drug, there is this small biotech. It's known, it's patented, and it's available. How soon can we start the clinical trial? How can you help as Indo US Rare, being there, connect us with the sponsor, move the needle? Whether I can bring my son to US, or if they can set up a site in India, whatever, I can move mountains or travel to the other side of the planet. Anything that's practically possible.
You said the product is in market, or it's being studied right now?
It's a patented product, not in the market. And there is a key opinion leader in the United States who is the world's leading expert in the disease, who believes that that's the best hope for any patient with that disease.
I mean, I don't work with a lot of venture capital, but if there's a lot of venture capital that's looking to start companies. I don't know. And Neil, you,
Yeah.
Company exists, by the way.
Yeah.
oh, a company exists.
Company
Oh,
exists. They have the product. It's just waiting to be taken through the clinical trial process.
As a former VC, I think that might be hard, but I mean, the logic tree would likely be if there's an ongoing clinical trial, try to avail of that. That's the most obvious and easy, and that may require travel, but that can be done. The setup of a novel clinical trial site, I think there's, for our panel before, I found that difficult. For instance, we have a motivated set of families and physician around a condition we work on called achondroplasia. And it's just been very, very difficult to gain the regulatory approvals so that we can set up a site to very quickly even offer the drug in a compassionate form. There are just compassionate, you could have a compassionate IND or whatever it's called there. I don't know precisely what that pathway looks like. I don't know if anyone in the room does.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk
Yeah.
about that. I think the challenge is the small company part of it. I think very often these things end up being bandwidth and money issues. So if they have it on the shelf and they're not doing anything with it, for them to orchestrate a single patient compassionate use, which is possible, at least in the US, is a huge lift. So I think this is one of those challenging situations where it would be very hard to get something going, realistically speaking. It would need to come from that company that they're actually willing to do it.
yeah. Or if there's the investigator and there's enough patients that you could run an IIT with our product 6 or 7 years prior to launching. And actually we had a phase 3 in Europe, but we had a couple physicians here do an IIT for small. So that's also, but again, that's a heavy lift, but it's just an idea.
Just to add that I don't think there's a silver bullet answer. But having the physician in India in contact with the KOL, kind of getting on the radar, having the KOL reach out to the company, starting to have the patient's family reach out directly to the company, talk to the people in R&D. I know that the last company I worked for, folks spent a lot of time talking to families and patients about new approaches in gene editing and gene therapy, and the people from our company didn't go find those people. Those people came in directly, and I think that's part of the process. It's not easy. It's pushing a big rock up a hill, but at the same time, you could have the opportunity to make the connections that could be positive later on.
Absolutely. We have started that process. We had the first call facilitated with the parents and the company directly, had very positive conversation. But and we had invited both the family and the sponsor to this conference, so we could learn from others and figure out what barriers need to be broken to create a pathway. One example, case study, success story can help make this more. So I know this is a difficult question for all of us, but appreciate all of you thinking and helping through this, because the father is not going to accept no as an answer. If he say no, he'll go to someone else. And so we need to figure out as a industry, how are we going to help these families?
Maybe a question for Anish. What is the heavy lift? I mean, is it the regulatory paperwork? I'm just curious.
It really depends on the status of the product. So, does it have an active IND? If it doesn't even have an IND, is there, more work needed? Is the product stable? So I just feel there's so many levels of this, which are like product dependent, that it would really need to be the company that was motivated to try and do it. Otherwise, as an individual, it's, I would say, impossible to do all the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just by way of anecdote, we had a situation like this arise in Turkey once with a MOCD type A patient. And that was the initial feeling was, oh man, it's going to be, that product we were prosecuting. And it did take a ton of paperwork. But what was interesting about it is we were able to lay out, at least for our internal organization, what that blueprint looks like. which I mean, I'm a big fan of that because then it's a repeatable process. It doesn't feel so overwhelming. And the second thing, maybe just for the advocates in the room and everyone who's not in this industry, it is odd to work on what we feel are important problems and be one of the most hated industries in the world. And so when you can put wins up like that, I mean, we deal with some very rare populations as well that certainly are not MPV positive, but we do it because I see how our employees react to things like that. It can be very powerful. So helping to tell that story back to the company, it's a really, really big deal, especially these days. So just something to talk about.
Agree. Dorothea?
I've had a lot of coffee, so I apologize. You guys are talking a lot about advocacy and you're speaking my language. There is nothing like a mom on a mission. There are dads on missions too. When I first started working at PWSA, I was surprised at how much our community didn't know about the drug process and how much they didn't understand about how policy can affect the drug approval process. They just want therapies and they want them now. So I would encourage you to definitely get involved with the advocacy agencies as soon as possible. And if you can help them in any way, shape, or form with some sort of an education campaign, I think that would be your best bet. It took us a good year and a half before our advocates really started to understand why they were dealing with policy. And Anish, I think, can explain to you what he's seen with our community, specifically in the Prader-Willi syndrome community over the past several years. One of the things that I started doing recently, and I found that it's really effective, trying to bridge the gap between our activists and the pharmaceutical companies that are working in our space. We have our advocacy meeting once a month. It's on a Wednesday afternoon. We started with 10 advocates. We have over 65 now. And I started bringing in some of these companies that are working in our space so that they have an opportunity to talk to our people who are kind of like our boots on the ground. And the response has been amazing. The response has been amazing from industry, and it's been amazing from our advocates. And they feel more connected to the work that's being done in the PWS space. And they're starting to be able to make those connections as we engage with policymakers, as we engage with the FDA. So I would encourage you to do that sooner, not later. And I would encourage you to help in any way, shape, or form. If you guys have, hello? If you have a government affairs office or a team that you contract out with to help with some of this policy stuff, that's also a great resource to share with these advocacy organizations. So, please do it, because all of that helps bridge the gap.
Thanks, Dorothea. And thank you all. This was not meant to be easy, and it wasn't. I didn't expect we'd have answers going out of here, but I think the takeaway is, Neil, if the answer is a book, I think organizations like Indo US Rare can actually be very helpful in creating that book and helping us navigate. So thank you all for listening, and thank you all for speaking.